I'm Cornell Clayton, director of the Foley Institute. On behalf of the Institute, I want to welcome you out to our event today. It couldn't be more timely. I just picked up our newspaper. Athletics looks to increase their budget by $500,000, which has just been approved apparently, to hire a new basketball coach. And so one of our guests, Pat Chun, the athletics director here at WSU, of course, is going to have to run off because, of course, we timed this just perfectly for him to be hiring a basketball coach today. So the topic today is to look at financing athletics at WSU. In many ways, there's never been a better time to be a Coug in terms of athletics. We just came off a very successful football season where we won the Alamo Bowl, had success at hosting ESPN's Game Day. Our women's volleyball team and soccer teams went to the NCAA tournaments, did extremely well last year. Just got money for construction of a state-of-the-art baseball clubhouse. So lots of things are going in the right direction. On the other hand, for the last 5 or 6 years, we've been running a budget deficit, which reached about $68 million in the last fiscal year, projected to grow to at least $85 million before it starts to break even in 2013. So that's what we're going to be talking about, the challenges of financing and funding athletics at WSU. And more generally, we have a terrific panel. We have Andrew Zimbalist, who is the chair of the economics department at Smith College, one of the country's leading sports economists. He's authored over 28 books on various aspects of sports economics. His most recent book is Unwinding Madness, What Went Wrong with College Sports and How to Fix It. We have Nancy Swanger, who is the WSU faculty athletics representative to the Pac-12 Conference and is the chair of the President's Athletics Council. And we have, of course, Pat Chun, who's the athletics director here at WSU. And Pat has, because of everything going on today, he came, but he has to take off early, so we're going to let him go first and say a few words and maybe take 1 or 2 questions, but he has to run out, and then we'll turn it over to the other panelists.
First of all, I apologize for the change in my schedule. I actually came here to apologize that I wasn't going to stick around, but I was coaxed into that couple minutes. So first and foremost, thank you for coming and participating in this. Probably the easiest place for me to start. So this is based on the topic. I guess as an outcome of the Morrill Act in 1890, Washington State, or Washington State College, or whatever was known at that time, was founded. And then for whatever reason, 2 years later, and the faculty drive every campus, especially back then, the faculty decided, you know what, let's add a baseball program. So 2 years later, the first baseball game was played at Washington State College. And then for the next century or beyond, athletics has grown to where it is today. But for whatever reason, back over a century ago, some people across all these land-grant and higher education or institutions of higher education decided that we are going to mix athletics and academics. Only country in the world that does that. I had a long talk with our former basketball player Aaron Baines the night after a game a week ago, and he's talking about the youth development program in Australia relative to basketball. Never mentioned about academics because they don't go hand in hand. In our country, they do. So because of that, because we made the decision a long time ago that athletics would complement the academic mission of the institution, that there was benefit to commingling athletics and academics. Now, I will tell you this, in our athletic program, or the athletic programs I've been associated with, the goal is always to complement what's learned in the classroom. That just maybe, and especially as the world has changed, and we have a generation here in this room today in which the military may have provided this type of training, but the world has changed. That was not something I thought about doing. I know a lot of young people in this room don't think about going to the military, but what athletics does provide is a intensive opportunity for young people to become better teammates, learn how to improve on a daily basis, how to work in diverse settings. I always look at we just had the tennis team at our house the other day. We're playing ping pong, and I think each member of that team can speak 3 languages, so they're communicating on this crazy level in some language that they've agreed upon subconsciously that they're going to talk about, and so they're trying to scheme against me in a game of ping pong. But it's amazing to watch them communicate. These people from all over the world figure out how to become one and unify behind a goal. And the reality of this, and you guys know this, is how you participate in team settings, how you help others become better, how you serve, how you lead. All of those things have this intrinsic value as you're trying to become the best you can be in life. So at Washington State, I've been here for 14 months. I will tell you this, two of the things I've come to believe. Number one, I don't think there's anything more important to Washington State and to our alums than our affiliation with the Pac-12 conference. There is a perception, there is a added value with us being a Pac-12 institution. So that is something that I know our alums, at least the ones I've spoke to, hold near and dear to their heart. Two, the vast majority of Cougs take an immense amount of pride with the success of our athletics program. We are one of those places where the success or lack thereof does impact the self-esteem surrounding the institution. So when we have a tremendous fall in which our football, cross-country, soccer, volleyball are performing at these wonderful levels, there's this immense amount of pride. There's a different experience for our students on campus, for our freshmen to want to go to football games and spend the night outside and be a part of game day. And you bring up game day, you talk about the value to the institution. From the moment Kirk Herbstreit tweeted out that they're coming to Pullman, I think there were over 430 million impressions about Washington State University. The ad value alone of all the time talking about Washington State. Sorry, I gotta look at my phone if you're texting me. All the ad value alone was worth nearly $5 million if you were to go purchase from the moment that was tweeted out to the end of the game. Why is that important? Well, the other reality too is this: athletics does impact the brand of the institution. Enrollment we've had the largest number of freshmen in the history of our institution. I will tell you this, if we're trending for a week in higher ed, and does that matter? Yes, that does matter if we're recruiting students. I use the analogy all the time. If Coach Leach and Chris Peterson, the Washington coach, walk into a high school, boy or girl are going to hand their phone to Coach Peterson and say, hey, can you take a picture of me and Coach Leach? Does that matter? Yeah. We're in the business of recruiting the best students to want to come to this campus. So our athletic program historically has outperformed our resources. We take pride that our budget, our expenditures are the lowest in the country relative to a Power 5 conference. For us to have the success we've had in the fall, for us to attract and develop the student athletes that we have, for us to compete beyond our resources, says a lot about our institution and our DNA and our athletic program. But the value of all that, I think I have an opinion. I think my teammates in the athletic department have a strong opinion that what we do adds tremendous value on the granular level to our student athletes. We believe we provide this world-class experience. It's embedded in their hearts every time they put on our jerseys that they represent all the Cougs everywhere around the world, and go fly anywhere across this country and wear that logo and watch someone say "Go Cougs" to you. That's how important it is. And we also understand that, I look at basketball. Part of the reason why there are a multitude of reasons why we made the change. One, our current students were having a great experience, but two, we're part of the student life here. And for us to go another year with the largest freshman class here in school history, not to program these young people to want to come to our games, not to have fun. I know there are a lot of options in Pullman on a Wednesday and Saturday night, but this should have been their top option when it's all said and done. So, we do have our financial challenges, but opportunities as well. We understand that when we operate very differently. You bring up the Regents meeting. My biggest takeaway from that Regents meeting is, and this predates me, but we do operate with a different amount of oversight with athletics. I think that's a healthy thing we did today. There was a statute that was passed that anytime we have to extend our budget by more than $250,000, we have to go to our Regents. Now, the reality is this: I'm a firm believer that there's going to be an uptick in ticket sales, and we'll be very pointed in that. We operated at 20. There's a business reason with our change as well. We operated at 20% capacity. If we just double that, that could be $300,000 in additional revenue for our athletic program to help pay for some of this. But we do operate with more oversight, more controls within our athletic department. We are in a healthier place. We have a 5-year recovery plan to where we need to get to. This, as long as we do this right, which we have a plan to, doesn't take away one iota from our plan to get to at least get to solvency again. So that's my elevator speech. I guess when you got to go. You don't have to take that. I can take one question.
One or two. Okay, one question.
Pick a staff member of athletics. It'll be softball.
I'm going to avoid them. Right here.
Can you talk about the 5-year plan that you mentioned?
So this predates me, but we put together, the athletics went in a, we understood, and it goes back to the need to be in the Pac-12. And we had fallen behind in terms of facilities, which I guess you're going to talk about, but the reality is this: for us to compete at the highest levels, we have to be able to compete in the recruiting. So we made some investments at a time and probably did not have the best funding plan to model that. So there are only certain things we can do to minimize expenditures. I would argue, and I agree with our president when we were talking about this job, we don't have an expenditure issue, we have a revenue issue. So only certain levers you can pull. Ticket sales is one, corporate sponsorships another, fundraising is a big one. I believe we have not improved, I want to say we underperformed. We have not improved at levels that a school like this should improve at. The affinity for Washington State is off the charts. Like I said, walk through an airport, you're going to find that you will hear from every Coug walking through an airport. So we just have to figure out how do we get in front of those people, how do we get them to understand how giving to Washington State impacts us. So a lot of what we're trying to do is really building up through corporate sponsorships, through ticket sales, and men's and women's basketball is where our upside is. Football has to remain at 90 to 95% capacity. We're there right now. That's why retaining someone like Coach Leach is imperative for our future, for our near future. And fundraising is going to be the biggest piece of that. So we got to grow our revenue streams. But I've since I've arrived, I'm very proud. We've turned over a quarter of our staff. The veterans I inherited tell me that's more of a sign of how hard I am to work for. But the reality is we had to change as a department. I'm proud to say that of the 24 of the staff that we've changed, I think over half of them are women or ethnic minorities. We had to get more diverse. We had to look the part of what we represent at the end of the day. And to be the best we can be, we got to be more diverse in the athletic department. So there's a lot of things going on in athletics that are going to get us to where we need to get to. But, and you guys know this is not something I decided. This is what society mandates, is winning does matter. And how you win, the best thing about Washington State, winning matters here. I wouldn't have come here, they wouldn't have hired me if winning didn't matter. The best thing about this place is how you win is how you're judged upon at Washington State. And that's good, because as the coach we hire, whose wife is from the state of Washington, she fully understands how our values drive what we do here. So, all right.
I'm going to let you run.
All right,
Thanks,
thank
Pat.
you guys.
All right.
Bye, basketball tickets. That's all I have to say.
Okay, so originally I had planned to have Professor Zimbalist speak first and provide a broader sort of national context for funding sports. But now that we've had Pat speak already, what I thought I'd do is we'd have Nancy Swanger speak first. She, as I mentioned, is the WSU faculty athletics representative to the Pac-12 conference. She also chairs the President's Athletics Council. She has a real job in addition to that. And her real job is she's the Associate Dean and Director of the School for Hospitality Business Management in the Crimson College of Business here at WSU. So I thought Nancy might spend a little bit of time just talking about her role, but also talking a little bit more about the athletics budget and maybe some misperceptions about the budget and how it operates.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today. I actually came with 0 prepared remarks, so I have a few things I'd like to say. I certainly would welcome any comments or questions or things. First of all, and people who are in athletics, and you, Doug, Kent, how many people know what a faculty athletics rep is? Okay, very few of you. So I'll start there, because you know what? About 2 years ago, I didn't even know that position existed. So. The faculty athletics representative is a position that's mandated for all programs that are in the NCAA, and it's the position has been around for many years, and essentially it is the person on your campus that is the kind of the liaison between your academic world and your athletic world, with a direct reporting line to the president. So 25% of my job now is a direct report of President Schultz. And in that scope of the position I've been doing, it'll be 2 years officially on the 16th of May. It's a 3-year appointment. We'll see if I get reappointed. But there are sort of 3 big buckets of things that come under that position. One is compliance, another is academic integrity, and the third is student-athlete well-being. And so what that means for me is I sit in a lot of meetings. I meet fairly regularly with folks over in Bowler Gym in the athletics department, Pat, the senior women's administrator, the athletic director, senior AD in charge of academics, compliance. I meet with the student athlete advisory council president. I also do chair the president's committee for athletics, the athletics council. And so so now that I said that, what does that mean? Well, so on the academic integrity piece, the one thing that I subscribe to a little online mailer and newsletter every day called the D1 Ticker. And if people are interested in athletics, it's a great way to get a snapshot without having to spend your entire day learning about what's going on in D1 athletics at least. But I'll tell you, I praise God and breathe a little sigh of relief every time I open that up, and it doesn't say something about Washington State University being part of Operation Varsity Blues, or the recent FBI indictment on tampering with student athletes, and that's a scary thing. So the academic integrity piece, each semester I actually get a list of every single student athlete who had a grade change, and part of what I do is I follow those up. I'll send an email, or I'll pick the phone up and I'll say, and it doesn't happen a lot, maybe it might be 5 to 8 student athletes, maybe 10, that had a grade change. And 99.9% of the time when I reach out and I ask, what this student had a grade change, what was the story, being a faculty member myself and having large classes, and most of the time the answer is, I was on the wrong line when I was entering my data. I was off a line, and I think, oh Lord, because that means you have a whole lot of grade change forms you have to do if you had a big class, and that's an even worse nightmare. But most of the time, it's just an accident. But what you don't want to have happen is it be someone, a faculty member, a PhD student, whoever it might be, that somehow felt pushed or coerced into changing a student's grade, because doing so then would positively impact that student's eligibility. So let's say that student actually failed a course, and now they're not eligible. And then all of a sudden, some grade report comes through that they went from an F to, a B minus. Well, that's kind of a big jump. Now, you would, those are the kinds of things you worry about. Big scandal at North Carolina a few years ago about, about academic integrity. Missouri's got something going on right now. And so we don't want to do that. So that is one thing that I do. But I do meet with with Thad Hathaway regarding academics. We visit all the time about particular issues that might come up. If somebody's been caught cheating, or there's something to do with tutoring or advising. All of those kinds of things we talk about in a pretty open and transparent manner. Compliance is a whole different bucket, and I have to tell you, if there's one thing I don't ever want to be reincarnated as, it's a compliance officer. I'm a business person, and I thought IRS code was bad until I realized what the NCAA puts out that people have to follow. And sometimes they're cheaters. But if you really looked at that NCAA book, I don't know how people keep that straight. And not only are some of those weird rules super weird, and they try to over-legislate and account for every possible thing that could go wrong, those rules aren't the same across sports. So what might be okay in recruiting over here isn't okay over here, and then you got to figure that out. When your day job is really to coach and groom and develop student athletes, both academically and athletically, you got to keep all those rules straight. So I meet with Catherine Walker, who heads up compliance on our campus, and sadly she's that person. I told her just yesterday, Catherine, you got to get out more. I mean, she gets giddy about the new proposals for legislation coming out, and talking to our coaches and people, and making sure they understand that. And I'm like, oh Lord, please, not ever in my lifetime, now or ever do I want to do that. So we talk about those kinds of changes and how they might impact it. And then of course there's the last bucket. It's kind of a three-legged stool, but at the end of the day, one bucket to me is bigger than the other, and that whole notion of student-athlete well-being. And there are lots of pieces that go into student-athlete well-being, I will tell you, and I think WSU does a tremendous job. And this is all new to me. I mean, I've been on this campus for 20 years. I've lived in this area for 40. I just didn't even know what went on inside the walls of some of this stuff. But the things that happen in terms of the care and attention for student-athletes is absolutely phenomenal. And as you all know, we went through a really terrible year last year. In 2018 with a death, and a couple of deaths actually, and it was a very, very dark period for WSU athletics, and I'm going to tell you that the staff that were involved in helping our student athletes and the resources that the campus put together to help them through that, unbelievable to me. And so, you know, things about nutrition, mental health, strength and training and conditioning, and all, you know, the academic resources, all of those things to try to put together this amazing student athlete experience. I do meet with the president of their advisory committee, the student run advisory committee, on a regular basis, talking about particular issues, whatever it might be. So those are kind of the three buckets of things that I do. I try to meet once a semester with President Schultz, or as needed, and thankfully there haven't been any of those as needed kinds of meetings. You know, one of those emergency ones. You know, when you pick the phone up and it says Kirk Schultz, and it stops your breath a little bit, because I'm hanging those circles normally. And so it's wonderful that we are in a good place with some solid leadership from the president, Pat, and folks who direct our programs and lead the various units in athletics. It's quite an impressive group, I have to tell you. I've learned a lot.
So, Nancy, can I put you on the spot?
Oh, please. Somehow I knew that was coming.
So I just want to ask you something we talk about in the Athletics Council, and it's not really your job, but we do talk about it, and that is the budget. And everyone knows that we have a budget deficit. So maybe you could just say a little bit about where that budget deficit came from, and what can be done to resolve, or what's being done to resolve.
Okay. So first of all, let me take off sort of this hat of being the FAR, and let me tell you what I knew about the athletic budget deficit before I got in this role. I am a supporter of college athletics. I understand the role that it plays on a university campus, how positively and negatively, but I guess I'm a hopeful person, and so to me, generally, it's a very positive thing. But as I understood the story, and it really quite, in some ways, hasn't shifted since then. You know, when the Pac-12 networks came to be, there was kind of a plan about the revenues that was going to generate at that time, and some, you know, an investment in facilities, banking on some monies coming from that, from those networks. There was a gap. What was supposed to come, then what actually came, there was a gap. And I will tell you, I will, rightly or wrongly, to Bill Moose's credit, in my opinion, he absolutely sort of resurrected Cougar athletics from the dead. In many ways, in terms of facilities, we were far behind. You know, when you're in the Pac-12, that's kind of a big deal, and we were miserably behind on multiple dimensions. And so Bill took some gambles, you know, made some investments, hired some people, and those revenues didn't materialize. And again, this is what I knew before I got here. And it's not my area. I don't have a lot of control over it. But I do think, you know, Pat alluded to it, you know, of the 65 schools in the Power 5, we absolutely have the lowest amount of money that goes out the door in expenditures. That's a great thing. I mean, we're trying to do the best we can with what we've got. The other piece of that, though, is we also have the lowest revenues coming in the door. And right now there's a gap between, still, even though we're being, you know, pretty frugal as we can, there's still a gap between what's coming in and what's going out. And so then that number continues to grow. I don't know what to say beyond that. That's the big. Okay, that's kind of the big part of what I understand.
Okay, so let me introduce our final guest, Andrew Zimbalist, who is the Robert A. Woods Professor and Chair of the Economics Department of Smith College, where he's taught since 1974. Professor Zimbalist has also been a consultant to the sports industry for players' associations, cities, companies, teams, and leagues over the years. He's the author of dozens of books on sports and economics, including his most recent one, which I mentioned earlier, Unwinding Madness, What Went Wrong with College Sports and How to Fix It. And he's going to be speaking tonight, giving a lecture actually on the NCAA money race and whether it's sustainable or not. That's at 4:30 in the Cub Auditorium. I encourage you to come to that. And I don't want him to give that speech right now, but maybe he can tease you a little bit about it. I asked him to just try to put some of our current budget deficit, why we're running such a large budget deficit, into a broader national context.
Thank you. So the deficit that keeps on getting mentioned is not a problem for just Washington State University. It's a problem for virtually every school in the NCAA, in Division III, in Division II, in Division I, in FBS, and in the Power Five. Vast majority of schools' athletic programs run in deficit. In fact, the last NCAA report that came out on finances, which dealt with the year 2015-16, found that the average, the median athletic department deficit in FBS, so talking about the top 129 schools, the median deficit was $14.4 million. In that last report, they said there were 24 schools out of the 129 that did not have an operating deficit. That number of schools that has an operating deficit in FBS is usually, that doesn't have an operating deficit is usually lower than that. It's usually around 20. So roughly 20 out of 129 schools avoid having an operating deficit. And those numbers that are produced are not really the right numbers. The reality is worse than those numbers suggest, because schools don't, the NCAA doesn't have a standard accounting set of rules that like normal accounting does in corporations. And so the extent to which certain facilities costs and certain indirect costs are reported is not complete. In fact, the NCAA sponsored a study several years ago by the Orzog brothers, and they said that the average school in FBS has a facility cost of about $25 million a year. And the amount that gets reported is much, much less than that. It's somewhere between $5 and $10 million for the average school. So if you take a $14.4 million deficit and you add on top of that full accounting for the capital costs and the indirect costs, it becomes an even larger deficit. Now, what's happening here at WSU is very special, I think, in a number of ways. One of the major sources of revenue for athletic programs is donations. In fact, within the Pac-12, 22% of athletic department revenues come from donations. 22%, almost a quarter. I'm pretty sure, because the figures that I have come from 2016 and 17, so it's 2 academic years ago. I'm pretty sure that the ratio here, based upon that year, is 12%. So you're only one half of the extent to which you can depend on that revenue source relative to the other Pac-12 schools. Another major source of revenue is tickets. Ticket revenues at WSU is one half of what it is at the other Pac-12 schools. Another major source of revenue is corporate sponsorships, corporate advertising, corporate licensing. Again, you're one half of what the other schools are. Why are you so low? Well, this is an outpost, right? This is a small town. Doesn't have very many large towns around it. Doesn't have very many corporations here. I think that the population of Pullman is less than the capacity at your football stadium. I'm not sure if that's exactly right, but it's somewhere in that neighborhood. So how do you sell out your football stadium? Pat mentioned you're about 90%, or maybe you said 92 or 3% of capacity. Well, you're playing in the big leagues when you're in the Power Five. You've got schools like Michigan that play in a stadium of 111,000 people, and they've got Ann Arbor, which is a very large community, but they also have an hour away Detroit, and lots of corporations to kick in corporate sponsorships to buy the luxury boxes or to rent the luxury boxes at their stadium. And you're dealing with a small population, very, very few corporations in the area, and a lot of open land around. There aren't suburbs that sprawl out coming out of Pullman. So how do you raise money? Well, the answer is it's really hard, and you're not as successful for structural reasons. Not because of the AD doing a bad job. Certainly not because your football team isn't playing above its level, where it should be. I don't know how you produce winning football teams all the time. And this is something that's not going to get, I don't think it's going to go away. I mean, Pat wants to be optimistic. He answered the question about the 5-year plan. He said, well, we've got this in place and that in place, and we've got to, we have high affinity, and we have to get out in front of those people more and let them know how important it is. Sure, that's great. You'll get incrementally more revenue. But there's a structural problem here, and I think it's going to get worse for a few reasons. One of those reasons is that there's a problem with the Pac-12 network, and I don't know Larry Scott well, and I'm not an expert in the Pac-12, but he signed a contract that is going to keep that revenue level down low. Another problem is what's going on in college sports in general. What's going on in college sports in general is there are a lot of athletes out there who feel like they're getting mistreated or they're not treated properly because they're generating tremendous amounts of money and they're not getting paid. They get a scholarship that might be worth $40,000 to $50,000. You get cost of attendance now, so you add another couple of thousand on top of that. When you add a couple of $1,000s on top of the old scholarships, it costs the University Athletic Department money. I think I read that there's something like an $800,000 additional expense for WSU from the cost of attendance that got legislated by the NCAA after the O'Bannon and the White cases, two antitrust litigations. You also have now, because of antitrust litigations, you have an obligation to maintain a training table or food provisioning to the athletes pretty much 24/7, not just 3 separate meals a day. So that adds hundreds of thousands of dollars of costs. You have a new ruling that came out of the Alston-Jenkins case. An antitrust ruling came out of the Ninth Circuit in Oakland, California last week that basically says that you can't have the NCAA cannot impose a limit on the educational benefits that student athletes can be given. So what kind of benefits are we talking about? One such benefit might be a free ride to graduate school, if anybody goes to graduate school. Another such benefit conceivably might be that summer training programs, instead of happening on the campus, are going to happen in Paris or outside of Paris. Why would you do that? Well, the reason you do it is because every school wants to attract the best high school football players and the best high school basketball players. And the Pac-12 schools are competing against each other, and they're going to try to present the best package they possibly can. So you're going to be up against the USCs and the Stanfords and the UCLAs of the world that have budgets that are $150 million or thereabouts, and you're operating with a budget that's under $70 million here. So I think the situation is going to get worse. There are going to be real trade-offs and I think tough decisions for not only WSU but for schools across the country going forward. That's enough of my...
So let me put you
now that
on...
I've made you all so optimistic and happy, I'll stop talking.
Let me put you on the spot real quick if I can. And it's been mentioned a couple times now, that's the Pac-12 networks and the contracts. Because one of the major revenue streams for college athletics now is TV rights.
Right.
And the SEC and others have done much better than the Pac-12.
Yeah.
So maybe just tell our audience a little bit about that process and what went wrong with Pac-12.
Yeah, it's not real clear to me, and maybe something Nancy could elaborate on, but my understanding is that Larry Scott signed a contract before the market kind of developed, and so it committed the Pac-12 for some period of time, and so he got less money, and that amount of money is locked in. One of the difficulties from my perspective is that I think that sports television markets have overdeveloped, and that they're all going to be in for a tough time. So that when I can go into that separately if you like, but when the Pac-12 contract comes up for renegotiation, I don't think there's a gold mine at the end of the tunnel. I think it's going to be tough sledding for a long time. The Big Ten schools, based on the revenue that they get from the Big Ten network and the revenue they get from the contract with ESPN and other networks, they get per school about $40 million a year, and it's going up to $50 million, I think, in a year or two. I don't know exactly where the distribution is in the Pac-12, but I'm pretty sure it's below 20. So that's a lot of money, but it doesn't help you on the world stage when you're trying to make the college football playoffs, or you're trying to win the Pac-12 championship. Again, the revenue level that you're dealing with relative to the median school in the Pac-12, you're about 50% of the median school. So you're not only the lowest revenue budget in the Power Five, but your most immediate competitors, you're way below. Not a little bit, you're way below where other schools are. So I just think it's going to be very hard as the player markets become more open and the demands upon recruiting the best players become more pressing, it's going to become more and more difficult.
Okay, thanks for depressing us all now. So we have some Q&A, right here, yeah, Marty.
I want to give you a chance to depress us more. Just recently in the spokesman, there was talk about how some conferences like the Pac-12 divide up the bowl revenue. All schools get an equal bit regardless of how many bowls they've gone to over the year. And some schools like Gonzaga in its league has been really carrying. It's been the one
Are
who's
you
brought
talking
in.
about basketball revenues as opposed to bowl revenues?
It was how, what, well, okay, maybe it is basketball
If
revenues.
you learn about Gonzaga, yeah.
But they're divided equally
Yeah.
in the Pac-12, but not, there is movement in some other conferences to make it be based on how much you bring into the pot.
Right.
Is that a danger, you think, in the Pac-12? And that would really be another negative factor, I would think, on WSU.
Yeah. There are some, what most conferences do for all postseason revenue, whether you're getting it from March Madness or you're getting it from bowl games, is they take the pot of money that you've earned from your postseason play, and they reimburse you for your costs for traveling to that place and moving your team back and forth and staying in hotels. They reimburse you for that, and then they divide the rest of it equally amongst all the schools. There are a few conferences that have an altered formula, which rewards the schools that are most successful more heavily. I don't think the Pac-12 is going to move in that direction. I just don't think that the college presidents would support that. And as you suggest, it would be quite disastrous for not just WSU, but all the schools that are in the bottom of the conference. And the other thing about this is that insofar as you tie the revenue flow to the number of victories that your team in football or basketball or some other sport has, is you create more uncertainty. And no budget director, no athletic director wants to deal with more uncertainty. You want to be able to have a good projection, pretty good projection. This is how much money we're going to make this year, and on the basis of that, you say, okay, I can afford $4 million for a football coach, maybe. Well, I can afford $1.4 million for a second basketball coach, maybe, and I can afford this and that, stadium improvements. But if you don't know, if every year the amount of revenue that comes in is going to jump up and down depending on whether you won 6 games or 10 games, it's very, very hard to do that. So I don't think I don't see any strong impulse within the Pac-12 or most other conferences to change that equal distribution formula.
Okay, yeah.
So going back to the Pac-12 network deal, because this is a pet peeve of mine, basically, where we got locked into this 10-year deal. But we had an opportunity recently to alleviate that, which was ESPN offered to take over distribution for Pac-12 networks in exchange for extending the media rights. But we turned it down for whatever reason. Could you comment as to why you think we turned that down? Because it seems like a very good thing.
So that would have locked you in for more years, right? So you're extending the media rights. There's a 10-year deal, and they said that they would have given you some extra revenue now. If you, I don't know how many years extra, the 12 years or 14 years. And it's just, if I were Larry Scott, I'd think, gee, I already overcommitted this conference the first time, and I've gotten a lot of flack for it, and so I'm not going to extend the deal any further.
Nancy, do you have any?
Yeah, I think that is exactly it. Plus, there's another sort of pending initiative out there for a $750 million equity partnership that they're looking to possibly sell, that would then split up, infuse some cash into the conference for a certain percentage ownership. And so if they had extended that would have taken that offer completely off the table.
Yeah, that's a strange offer, I think. It's basically saying, I want money now, and in exchange for my getting more money now, I'll earn less money going forward. And why would you do that? Why would the conference say, I'd rather have, forgetting about the time value of money and discount rates, why would they say, I'd rather have $100 million today than have $10 million a year starting in 5 years? Why would they do that? I think because there's a sense of desperation, that they're seeing themselves fall behind the other conferences. They're seeing the Pac-12 football powerhouses not be able to go to the football playoffs. And they don't want to get into a situation where they're seen as second rank. The other thing you're going to sacrifice is if you get into bed with private investors, is you're going to sacrifice some control over the network, potentially, and what kinds of games. One of the reasons that conferences have started sports networks, regional networks, is because they're trying to give equal or better, more exposure to some of the Olympic sports and some of the women's sports. And so there's an intellectual and an academic purpose behind controlling your own media outlets, and that would also potentially be compromised.
Okay. Let me get one over here first. Yes.
Can either of you speak to the budget cuts and faculty eliminations that happened as of last year to make room for the growing deficit?
Well, yes, sort of. We did not actually. President Schultz's plan was not about cuts, really. It was about more effective management of the resources that you have. And so sometimes things that go away are not always simply related to budgetary issues, but maybe it's been deemed that something is non-essential or something's gone or grown or something. I'm not saying it's always that way, but I don't think it's ever been President Schultz's philosophy to totally to cut your way out of this problem. It's to grow our way out of the problem, actually. But we need to be better stewards and more fiscally responsible with the budgets that we have. And so that was, as someone who manages a budget in a department, and who actually has budget reserves, college-wide in the Carson College, we've got a fair amount of money in reserves, which you would hope, since we're a college of business, that maybe we manage our money better. I don't know.
You're not like any other colleges.
Well, there are some big colleges on this campus that are in serious trouble because they spend more money than they bring in, and at some point, you've got to be a good steward of the resources. And so, while it appears that these are cuts and some things that way, it may be just more effective management of some of the things that should have been happening all along. So I don't know if that's a great answer, but I don't think it's ever been anybody's goal that you just cut your way out of this problem. We've got to grow our way out of this problem, university-wide, including athletics.
Okay. Right here. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if I could ask you a couple of bigger picture questions, and I'm thinking about the relationship between varsity sports and the mission of universities, which I think of as knowledge creation and knowledge transfer. So one is, as Director Chun mentioned, is that sports is an incentive for people. It brings awareness to the university, and I was able to read the first 28 pages of your book on Google Books, and you mentioned this purpose of athletics going way back in history, but. And so the question I have is that the right question anymore? I think more in terms of marginal returns. Is the extra money that we're putting into our athletic programs generating even more enrollment from students? So that's one question. The second question is this kind of conventional wisdom that more successful athletic programs bring in more revenues into the university. I mean, you just mentioned that doesn't necessarily lead to solvency, but even if that were true, where the money comes in, it doesn't go to the university as a whole, it just seems to go to the athletic programs. And I had the opportunity to do a site visit at the biology department at University of Oregon right after the Marcus Mariota times. And they had this gold-plated athletics facility, but their biology labs were worse than we have here. So I guess I was just wondering what your thoughts are on those two kind of bigger picture questions about, again, the relationship between the mission of universities and these varsity sports. I encourage you to come to my talk this afternoon. I have to miss it because
you're asking
faculty meeting.
You have a faculty meeting?
Yeah.
Okay, so.
But they're not important. You can skip those.
I'm running it, so.
All the more reasons.
Yeah, that's right.
So there are a lot of questions that were packed in there, and very briefly, Pat alluded to this and said he didn't know who made the decision. What happened was the Morrill Acts were passed in 1860, and they created land-grant colleges, and they created a heck of a lot of them, all at once. And it was a time in U.S. history when you had to be a member of the upper crust to send your kids to college. There weren't a lot of kids going to college in the 1860s and 1870s, and a bunch of college presidents decided that they got the most publicity and the best publicity from crew team competitions that they had intercollegiately, and the growing sport of football. And so the reason why intercollegiate athletics got integrated into the mission, the academic or the educational mission of these schools, was promotional. That was the idea. So you're asking a couple of questions. One is, does athletic success lead to increasing numbers of applications? Pat certainly implied that. Econometric work that's been done. Econometrics is a form of statistics where you look at lots and lots of schools over lots and lots of years, and you throw their data into a software program, and it tells you what the relationships are. The scholarly econometric work that's been done suggests the following: that having not just successful, but having a top-level successful football program or basketball program can increase incrementally, not massively, but incrementally, it can increase the number of applications. Now, what's often argued is that if you have more applications, the admissions department can be more selective. And if they're more selective, then the student body is better, in quotes, right? They have higher SAT scores or ACT scores, they have higher high school ranks, and so on. That has not been confirmed by the econometric studies. So it does seem that it's possible that you get more applications, but doesn't allow you to be more selective, and that suggests that the people who apply to a school because their football team came in first place in the conference instead of second place are not the people who have the higher SAT scores or ACT scores. In terms of donations to the school, again, the scholarship there is not very supportive of that argument. The argument being that if you have a better football and basketball team, men's basketball team, that there'll be more alums who are giving you money, there'll be more Phil Knights out there giving Oregon its money, and so on. That's not supported. And there's another argument that says that the state legislatures will give you more money if you're more successful. And, there have actually been a few studies that find a tenuous link there, that there is such a link, but there have been other studies that don't observe that link. So there are a lot of claims about how athletic success leads to academic success. I think they're hard to sustain based upon the scholarship that's out there, although some of it is still a little bit fuzzy. Sometimes there's some relation. What is true, what we have found, is that everybody, maybe not everybody, but some people have heard of the Flutie effect. Mm-hmm. Doug Flutie, who threw this wonderful pass for Boston College at the end of the football season, and then the applications to Boston College jumped by 14%. So it's known as the Flutie effect. Athletic success leads to academic success. That 14% was on a trend line that Boston College was experiencing at that point in time. That is to say, the previous year they'd also grown by 14%. And the year before that it had grown by 14%. So it's true that after Flutie threw the pass, it grew by 14%. But there's no incremental improvement beyond that. But there is, nonetheless, you hear all the time that athletic success leads to academic success. One of the problems with that, and certainly there's no implied connection to WSU when I say this, but some schools have bought into that ideology so strongly that they cheat and have academic scandals in order to recruit the better players, right? And what then happens is some of them, like North Carolina, get caught, and that hurts the reputation of the school, and that hurts the academic side of the ledger. So it's just a complicated and interesting question, and I think at the end of my consideration of the available scholarship is I would simply say be cautious. If that's why you're doing it, be cautious. There is, there's a trade-off here. There's a trade-off. If the athletics department is running deficits of $8 million a year, that's $8 million that could be spent some other way. And I'm not saying that athletics isn't worth $8 million, because I understand that it's important to the culture here. And I'm not telling you what to do because I haven't made an in-depth study of WSU, other than to note that it's pretty remarkable that you do as well as you do. But there is $8 million at the end of the day. I don't know if that was a 2016-17 number. Honestly, I don't know if last year was a little higher, a little smaller than that. There is that. You have to think hard about how you want to use the resources.
Just right here now.
Yeah, so thank you for coming in and talking first off. I have a specific question and then sort of a general one. Is it Dr. ma'am?
It is.
Okay,
You can just
perfect.
call me Nancy,
Okay.
please.
Nancy, you said earlier that the athletic department was being as frugal as we can, and I'd like to point out that we're spending $6 million a year on Leach. Ernie Kent is fired. We still have to pay him for 3 more years. We are now paying the highest paid coach is the new one for basketball, and so when I see graduate students who barely have enough money to live, adjunct professors live on average 30% of them are below the poverty rate, and we have professorships that aren't filled in many departments. How would we be able to justify that as being frugal? And then my second one is the athletics department has factually negatively impacted our school and the amount of resources we have for students and academics. And so my question is, who's the oversight for the athletic department, and why are we doing such a poor job of overseeing that? And now this is coming from someone who loves going to Cougar football games and was really upset that I couldn't put WSU on my NCAA sheet for March Madness. But I do have some serious concerns about the way we're operating.
And rightfully so. And when I saying frugal, that was probably not my best choice of words. Let me just say that. I do think they do. I think the athletic department does a pretty phenomenal job of trying to squeeze the most out of the dollars they have and still come up short. At the end of the day, there's still, whether we like it or not, and you can, certainly you could argue either way, but there is this arms race. If this is the game we're choosing to play or choosing to be in, being part of the Pac-12 and doing some of these kinds of things, there are just certain costs that you have to have. And even when you talk about Mike Leach's salary, his salary is not the highest paid Pac-12 coach. Chris Peterson is at the University of Washington. So, and we're all in the same state, all jockeying for the same, some of those same kinds of dollars. And, that makes it a very difficult thing. At the end of the day, certainly there are people who oversee the budget in athletics. There are people, Pat oversees athletics. Pat's a phenomenal hire in my opinion. I think he's going to do great things here. But we also have budget oversight people at the university level. Ultimately, we have a president. All of those sorts of things. And our president is probably one of the most, I would argue, probably one of the most in tune presidents in terms of the NCAA and the role of college athletics, and highly respected out there. And so it's, no one's happy about these numbers. They didn't happen overnight, and they're certainly not going to get fixed overnight. I think there are some plans that are going to take some time to get out of that kind of a hole. I would go back just for a second to the question you raised about, or the point that you made about going to Oregon, and they've got these amazing facilities, and then they've got these sort of decrepit biology labs. The other thing that we rely on in this business, especially as state-funded institutions from our donors, is our donors decide kind of where the money goes. And while we hopefully tell the right stories to the right people at the right times with the right philanthropic interests, that doesn't mean we can say, hey, Phil Knight, instead of this ridiculously lavish football locker room that is the Taj Mahal, hey, will you invest in our biology lab? He might say yes, but he might not as well. I mean, we don't always get to dictate where the gifts go. And that's just a sad reality. People want to be part of what they're a part of. And I will tell you, in athletics here at WSU, we have a lot of donors who donate across the system that are quite philanthropic in terms of, they'll give a gift to athletics, but they'll give a gift to the Carson College of Business or to the museum, whatever it might be. It's, they're not necessarily just singularly focused donors, but that doesn't necessarily build a new biology lab.
Let me underscore what Nancy said, if I could, just very briefly. I think this is a systemic problem that you're identifying. It's not a lack of frugality in WSU's part. If WSU chooses to stay in the Pac-12 and they choose to be competitive, then they have to go out and pay for the best coaches that are available to attract the best students, and they have to have stadiums and facilities that meet certain standards. And they have a choice. They can choose to opt out of that world altogether. That would be a massive change in the history and the culture of this place. I'm not saying whether it should be done or it shouldn't be done, but it's a major decision. It's not simply a matter, and by the way, my understanding is that Coach Leach is $4 million. All of the football coaches are $6 million. I don't think his salary is $6, so I might be wrong about that. There are coaches that are paid a lot more than that. There are basketball coaches that are paid $7, $8, $9, $10 million a year. Pitino was being paid $10 million a year before he got fired for getting involved in a scandal. But I think it's a systemic problem, and it's a problem that should and can be dealt with at the level of the NCAA. And I'm going to talk about that this afternoon.
That's a good teaser. Yeah, come back here.
It seems to me that what you're saying is it's almost inevitable that if you're in an arms race and you can't compete, eventually it seems to me that the practical thing to do is say, we can't do this anymore. Because if you keep throwing the money into it and you're always going to be behind, you're at the bottom of all the Power Five, you're at the bottom of the Pac-12, it's only you suggest it's only going to get worse. Isn't there some time you just say enough is enough and we got to pull out of this?
There might be such a time. As I said,
I realize you're not making the decision.
I'm not making the decision, and I'm not an expert on WSU. I know what your athletic statistics are because I know what the available information is, and I've looked at it. But I don't know enough about your university to begin to pretend that I should tell you whether you should make that decision or not. And let me emphasize again that where you're on the bottom is in your revenue resources. As far as I can tell, you're not on the bottom in your performance. That is to say, your competitive performance. And to me, it's mind-boggling that you're able to do that you're able to perform as well as you can or you have. I don't know whether you'll be able to continue to perform at that level because what I was saying before is as a result of some changes within the NCAA and as a result of antitrust suits and as a result of Fair Labor Standards Act litigations and other things, there's a lot of pressure to pay the athletes more or to give them more resources, not just the old scholarship, the old grant and aid. And as those pressures escalate, I think the schools that have more resources will be better able to handle them, and schools like WSU will have more difficulty handling them. So I'm just trying to say, I don't want to leave you as Pat did. I don't criticize him for doing it. It's his job, and he was, I think, articulate and compelling in what he said. But I wouldn't want to leave you with the sense that, oh, we have a 5-year plan and we're going to get out in front of our donors and we're going to get more money from them. And our basketball team is going to generate another $300,000 a year in tickets and therefore we're going to balance our budget. I think that's too rosy.
Okay. Get back there.
Yeah, if more than 75% of the universities are in a deficit, and you said they're underreporting that numbers.
Yeah.
And we know that the students themselves aren't making money playing ball for us. If I turn on a TV tonight, I'm going to see a lot of basketball. If I turn on TV in the month of December, I see a lot of college football.
Yeah.
Somebody's making money.
Yeah.
Who is that? Besides the coaches, who's making money?
Coaches are making a lot of money, and that's something I'll talk about some more this afternoon. And athletic directors are making money. Conference commissioners are making very good money. College presidents that buy into the system, and there are a lot of them, don't make a lot of money from it, but they get to take their administrators down to Louisiana or down to Miami or Tampa in late December, early January, and go on junkets. And there are a lot of people who buy into this system. There's a momentum to the system. There have been college presidents historically who have said this is nuts. I'm not talking about WSU, but just talking about the commercialization, the hyper-commercialization of college sports, not only for economic reasons, but for ethical reasons and also educational reasons. Those presidents who have tried to fight the system, gone out on a limb by themselves, have usually been fired, or they have their hands and toes cut off by the trustees or the regents. They haven't been successful. The only way to address the systemic issues, I think, is either through Congress or by having the college presidents in through their national organization, the ACE, or through the Association of Governing Boards, where you have the trustees in the regions around the country, saying we have to tell the NCAA that they've got to do things differently because there's simply more and more financial drain that we can't afford. And as we look down the road, it's getting worse and worse. It's very hard on an individual level, whether it's an individual president or an individual school, to opt out. It's very hard to do that, or it's very hard to change the system in a productive way. There are a lot of initiatives in Congress right now. There are a lot of state legislatures that are taking initiatives around college sports. I think it's something that's going to happen because, as I said at the very beginning of my remarks, it's not just WSU that's losing money in their programs. $14.4 million median deficit in FBS. That's larger than your deficit here. So other places are bleeding a lot more than you are.
Okay, I think unfortunately our time is up, but this is actually, it's a depressing point to end on, but it's a good tease for tonight's discussion that Professor Zimbalist will be having. Again, that's in the Cub Auditorium at 4:30. He'll be talking about the NCAA money race and can it be stopped. Let me also, before I ask you to thank our guests, also remind you of another event, actually just let you know we have another event we just put on the calendar. Next Wednesday at 10 a.m. we have Governor Jay Inslee, who will be coming to talk about green energy in the state of Washington. It'll either be here or next door in the Kimbrough Hall. So put that on your calendar as well. Join me now in
You know what
thanking.
his salary is? $172,000.
Yeah. Join me now in thanking our guests for a really interesting and excellent.